Let's look at a gateway load balancing protocol configuration example. Notice here that we have R1 and R2. These are routers. GLBP works on both routers and multi-layer switches. However, on multi-layer switches, the support is not as widespread as HSRP and VRRP. So you might have a multi-layer switch that doesn't support GLBP simply because it's a lower end multi-layer switch. Typically, we find GLBP on the higher end multi-layer switches. So let's examine an initial setup. And it's relatively simple, as you can see. There's only 3 commands that we really have to worry about on an initial setup to get it working. If we examine R1's configuration here, we're dealing with interface fast Ethernet 0/0. So we are enabling GLBP on the interfaces that connect down to the end stations that are going to be used as that default gateway, that exit point out of the local area network. It's also that interface that's going to be able to support the hello packets across. So R1 and R2's interface have to be in the exact same subnet. And if you examine the configuration, we see IP address 192.168.1.2/24 and IP address 192.168.1.3/24. They are in the exact same subnet. So the hello packets are going to go back and forth along this layer 2 LAN that we have set up between R1 and R2. We have to configure a virtual IP address. For GLBP, the commands all start with GLBP, and then you specify the group number. In this case, we're dealing with group 1's configuration. Keyword IP, and then your virtual IP address. So 192.168.1.1 is the virtual IP address that will be utilized in this case. That is the same IP address that's going to be utilized as the default gateway on all of the different PCs. So PC1 is 192.168.1.1, PC2, PC3, and so on and so forth. Now, preemption is not enabled by default. Stop right there and listen closely. Preemption is not enabled by default for the AVG process. Let me repeat that. It's not enabled by default for the AVG process, the Active Virtual Gateway. And this is how you enable it for the Active Virtual Gateway process. GLBP, group number, preempt. Now, why would you want preemption enabled for the AVG process? The reason why is because if you have a certain router, for example, R1 in this case is the AVG, and we have a failure of R1, so R2 becomes the AVG at that point, what happens when R1 comes back online? Will it resume its role as the Active Virtual Gateway? Not if preemption's not enabled. Preemption allows R1 to take back that role. But it's only going to take back the role if it has the higher priority. By default, the priority for the AVG is 100. So if you want a specific router to be the AVG, you will have to give it a higher priority and make sure that you've enabled preemption as well, which we've done here. And when we compare the configuration to R2, notice the only command that's missing is the priority command. So the default priority is 100, therefore R2's priority is 100, making R1, in this case, the AVG, the Active Virtual Gateway. So now that R1's the Active Virtual Gateway, it will hand out the MAC addresses to the AVFs. It will also hand out the MAC addresses to the different PCs.